Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Wheel Bite. Not even going to sugarcoat this one with pleasantries. We go into a pretty heavy discussion about life and death within the context of skateboarding. People are always going to be passing away, and it never gets any easier. It is the one constant we have in this life, which we discuss in this episode. But skateboarding is life. It's a beautiful thing. And those of us who are diehard skaters, it's something we carry with us every day of our lives. So, here it is. Life and death episode. Rest in peace, Cesar Rosado.
Welcome to San Francisco. Don't skate here.
I feel like it's dangling by a fucking strain of bone marrow.
East Coast powerhouse.
From New York, I stab you in the Western Fork.
Carter, it is fucking Friday the fucking 10th.
Dude, I'll give you $100 and I'll take out the Denny Hondas and you slide that 75-foot handrail.
I especially like the flip of the board.
We are rolling and we are live. What's up out there, entire world? Welcome to another episode of Wheel Bite. I'm host one of two, Ted Theodore Mater. With me as always,
Jay Green here.
Today, so it's gonna be a little different today. We're not coming at you with some like personal favorites or some sort of like fun-filled topical discussion. We're actually coming at you with something a little heavy today, and that's why there's no intro like we normally do. But it's been pretty heavy year in skateboarding as a whole. I think everyone who follows skating knows what I'm talking about. We've lost a lot of people in a very short amount of time, and it's been pretty tough. Some of them were accidents beyond their control, and others were due to things you read about in the media, like depression and emotional trauma. But because of that, I think we're entering a different time in skate culture as a whole, and that's kind of something we wanted to address today.
And for the listeners that aren't in San Francisco or California, it's worth noting that this probably hit, with a few of the specific deaths, this probably hit the Bay Area and California a little harder than maybe other places.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for us, this was like, we had this idea, and it kind of, I don't know, we wanted to pay respect and talk about death and history of skateboarding kind of on a spectrum as a whole. So we had this idea, and it kind of turned into more or less discussing death and the other side of it,
which is aging and just getting old and still being able to skate, because that's
all within a whole of the short skateboarding history and how we're living through it right now.
Yeah, because that's the flip side of all this, is that as much as we are losing people around our community that we love and miss dearly, there's also all these people who are getting old that we grew up loving, who have managed to remain on the board and keep putting stuff out and keep skating for as long as their bodies allow them to. It used to be way more common for people to just up and quit due to like career change or injury or whatever, but now, I mean, you see people working through that. How many skaters do you see also talking about like wellness and health and staying physically fit in ways that are just beyond like pushing around in the streets? You see that so much more often nowadays.
It's much more about it's no longer a sprint. It's like maintaining, and can you get to that Eric Costin and Guy Mariano and Mark Johnson and Daewon Song level? Can you maintain that? I think that it's skateboarding has completely flipped in that sense.
And I mean, I think that is also a sign of the times, because skateboarding is now like going on 50 years old as the counterculture that it's always been. You know, skateboarding back in the 60s and early half of the 70s was just a fad. You know, it was just something. But then when the counterculture kind of sucked it in and turned it into what we have today, it was very much a live fast medium of expression, you know.
Which it still is.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That hasn't changed at all.
But it's matured very much.
Yes. Now I would say you're still living fast, but you're also taking a moment to pump the brakes and check out the sunset,
right,
or smell the roses, or whatever.
Or go to yoga.
And
be a vegan.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing. The wellness thing has always kind of been a big deal. You know, like look at Mike V and Ed Templeton, who swore by being vegan and straight edge and all this stuff, going as far back as like the early 90s. But at the time, I think everyone kind of looked at them like they were crazy. Now it's way more common to just see that, like, you have all these skaters eating these well-rounded diets. There's a crew here in San Francisco who they're all into like veganism, and they have this account where they show like the vegan stuff that they're eating on any given day. And, like, it's their like little crew, and they're like, today we're just eating like mango milkshakes. Like, it's just blended mango in a fucking cup. That's it.
What has skateboarding become?
But hey, I mean,
kidding. Shout out to them.
Yeah, if it helps you stay on the board and stay healthy, then cool. That's the thing. But the flip side of this is there are a lot of things skaters are battling every day, whether it be the mean conditions of the streets or addiction or depression, and that's like why we've hit this point this year. We've seen it.
It seems like for 6 months there, or I mean, honestly, even the last couple of years, it's just been like one thing after another.
Yeah.
As far as losing legends and local legends, and, you know, it doesn't just end with the famous people. You know, we all have people in the skateboard community who may not be the most known that we may have lost to. So, you know, there was that viral video on Instagram recently of, I think, just a local skater in New Orleans, and they had the service for him, and they did a rock and roll on a ramp with his casket. Did you see that?
I did not, but that's awesome.
Yeah, it was like the most heartwarming thing I've seen in a long time, and really, that actually kind of sparked a little bit of the idea of this, and just like we'll get more into it as the episode goes on, but it's been a tough couple years, specifically this year. But, you know, it's also inspiring at the same time, because it's just like skateboarding has matured so much, and how I think where this idea for this episode sparked was how is the skateboard community and skateboard world handling and accepting and cherishing and honoring the people who we've lost.
Well, I mean, look at one of the big ones from a couple years ago, and that was when we lost P-Stone.
Right, and that's, of course, like, kind of what I'm roping him in by saying it's been a tough couple years.
Yeah,
that was
course.
almost exactly 2 years ago.
And it was really rough. I mean, that's a guy who is known in our culture as being the ultimate road dog. And when you are the ultimate road dog, means you travel a lot, but also that means you meet a lot of people. The scope of people that, you know, reached out and were so heartbroken by his loss, it all had to do with the fact that they had run into him at some point in their travels. You go around the world like that, you're bound to make a lot of friends and a lot of people who cherish your presence.
P-Stone was the poster boy of that.
Oh, absolutely.
He could make, he was rough around the edges, and if you know anything about P-Stone, you know how he got down, but, the dude with just like, that was the first thing that kind of actually sparked this whole idea with me, was like just seeing people like who had nothing to do with skateboarding. And like I was in Spain at the time when I heard, and I was traveling with a buddy who is not a skater at all, but like I was like super affected by this, and I kind of like spent a couple days cluing him in on like his whole situation, and like how epic he was as a human. And like by the end of the day, my buddy, who had no clue about who P-Stone was, or is not integrated into the community and the culture like we are, he fully understood and was like totally on board, and like fully grasped how heavy it was and how epic of a human he was and how many lives he touched. So to go above and beyond the skateboard community and just have that effect on people, like he could make a grandma love him,
Yeah, and I think that's why it was such a heartbreaking sudden loss, and it was because of a huge accident. And that's one of the things about our lifestyle and culture, is there is such a margin of error with skating, whether it be the light turns green at the wrong time, or there's just that one little pebble in the sidewalk you don't see while you're going really fast, or
a reckless lifestyle.
Yeah, or you're just a little too drunk when you're trying to drop into the ramp or whatever. There's so much room for something to go wrong, and as a result, sometimes the consequences are devastating. And that's what we've seen a lot recently. And our lifestyle in general is what kind of contributes to that. I mean, you're taking a risk every day if you get on your board and skate through an urban environment from your house to your job. I mean, that's the same with anything, Even like when you get into a car, you're taking a similar risk. You read these statistics all the time about anything, whether it be cars, trains, planes, just walking through the wrong neighborhood, hiking fucking Mount Everest, whatever. There's always risks.
Well,
but skateboarding has a lot of them.
Skaters certainly don't get their rocks off by staying safe.
No. And that's part of why I think most of us pick up a board in the first place. It's a little dangerous, and it's exciting, and it gets the heart pumping in a way that very few things allow us to feel. But the thing about this culture and lifestyle, when we were kind of brainstorming this episode, found ourselves comparing this to hip-hop a bunch. Because if you think about it, hip-hop and skateboarding are roughly around the same age. Skateboarding's a little older, at least in the way that the culture had refined it and made it what it is today. So like Dogtown was probably like 4 or 5 years before like the earliest hip-hop recordings were coming out. They were both looked at as a young person's game. The culture that surrounded it was very youth-oriented. Those who participated in it were very youth-oriented. And the way people got made into superstars very quickly, and then their lifestyle just might have caught up with them too quick. Again, very similar to that of hip-hop and skateboarding.
Yeah, the timing of the two is just undeniable, and the similarities of counterculture and fast lifestyle and kind of, and whatever it may be. We're not just talking about tragic, losses.
Right.
And well, I should say in a dramatic, tragic loss. And hip hop, of course, has dealt with much more death than skateboarding. But, you know, like Ted said, we couldn't help the comparisons between the two. And I think our main point, again, to kind of come back to the theme of this is the history books are so short right now.
Exactly.
For both of these cultures. And to lose prominent figures or people in the community steadily, which is now what we're seeing with skateboarding, because skateboarding has been growing so much. Hip-hop has been affected by it more because of, you know, the street lifestyle associated with it. But, you know, I think this year, and again, why this was so important, this episode was so important for us to do, was this year, I think we really started to understand how much the community has expanded, and that inevitably, since skateboarding is growing so rapidly, and now that we're getting into a time where there are skaters in their 50s, 60s, that we're going to start having to deal with this a lot more often.
Yeah, so one of the big ones we lost this year was Jake Phelps. And you want to talk about a guy who lived a specific lifestyle. Like, I would argue he was skateboarding's true embodiment of Hunter S. Thompson.
For sure.
You know, and I didn't coin that, by the way. Max Schaff coined that in his episode of Epically Latered. But it's so true, because Phelps was very much like, he had to be involved in the story, even if the story wasn't about him. And that's kind of how Hunter S. Thompson was. Like, he would be on the campaign trail with some fucking shitty candidate, and it wasn't about the candidate themselves, but more his experience being with that candidate on the road and the kind of people he was meeting and so on. Phelps was the same way, and he lived his life similar to that of Hunter S. Thompson, where he definitely was trying to better himself in the last portion of his life by staying clean. But at the same time, the skateboarding lifestyle, again, we watched him all over the world. We watched him hit his head at Dolores Park only like 2 years ago, and that dude's like in his mid-50s still bombing one of the biggest hills in the city, where on the bunt he told them that he clocked in 45 miles an hour on any given day bombing that hill, which he did every morning at about 6 a.m. You know, that's dedication right there. But at the same time, whether or not he was taking better care of himself now or not, he still had done all this stuff in the past, which it wears down on your body. So seeing the fact that the invincible Jake Phelps, because he'd gone through so much, like, you know, and we witnessed so much of it in the public eye. So when the word finally got around that he passed, I actually didn't believe it at first.
Yeah, nobody did. Impossible.
Yeah, and
indestructible Jake Phelps.
The fucked up part is someone I know posted something about it happening long before Thrasher made their post about him passing. So a lot of people thought my homie was like bullshitting them. They thought he was pulling their chain. And
that's a whole other fucking can of worms, dude. I mean, at this point, I feel like we're having to bring in social media into every one of our episodes.
I mean, it's undeniable.
It's super valid. Like, that's a whole other thing of how we're dealing with death and how we're remembering people, is like the social media pour out, you know? And that, like, it's unfortunately, that's where we are now, and there's going to be some shit like that, like what you're saying right now, of like, yo, like, maybe that was too soon, maybe that wasn't tasteful,
or maybe just like, is this person fucking with us? Because, you know, it is so easy to write that someone has died on social media, and then everyone believes it without actually like checking the source.
And everyone has their own agendas. I want to be the first person to post this. Like,
yeah, which is fucked up.
Super weirdo shit, but it's out there and it exists. And people use social media how they will. We all know that.
So yeah, one of the point I was trying to make by bringing up Jake Phelps' passing this year is that was like a true sign of where we were at, because
we lost our grandfather.
Yeah, exactly.
Skateboarding's
crusty grandpa.
Yeah, whiskey drinking crusty grandfather.
But yeah, and it's true. Like, that dude has had a voice in our community for 30 some odd years, and it's hard to even envision skateboarding without him. And I mean, now we're figuring out how to get through it without him. But when it happened, it was like, it just rocked everyone to their core in a way that there's no real comparison for it, like within music or something, other than like some massive rock star dying or something like that, because Phelps embodied everything about this culture.
And as someone who's definitely considered old in the skateboard community, which he was, he still had such a major influence on it.
Exactly.
And you know, it's a lot of times like if like an old sports star or something passes away, or old musician, you know, they're remembered and it's a big deal, but a lot of times these people are a little removed from their cultures.
Yes.
And that was the opposite of the case with Jake Phelps. You know, he was still very much the glue. This guy brought Thrasher to TV, more or less, you know, and had a big part in that, and was on TV, and he transcended so much. And even in his own span of like hardcore skating, core skating, like fuck the bullshit, like everyone knows that about Phelps if you ever met the guy, to him even bringing it like for it to be okay to be on TV, nonetheless him show his face on TV.
Yeah. So even looking back too at some of the big deaths in skateboarding that happened when we were younger, you had your people like Mike Ternasky, who was a huge influence on a lot of people coming up in the first half of the 90s. You had Keenan, which I think at the time was like one of the biggest because he was so loved by everybody around him.
And in the prime of his career.
Yeah, he was absolutely crushing it. Same thing with someone like Pepe Martinez. And those at the time were so out of nowhere that it did truly rock the skate community to its foundations. You know, it would be almost all you could read about for a long time in the mags, and there was no social media back then. But, you know, you see what kind of lasting impression a passing like that had on the early skate community, based on like the fact that every girl chocolate video from here on out, like even the one they released last year, it still had the like Keenan Forever thing on it. You know, it's something they'll never be able to truly forget or get rid. Like they'll never. I don't think Girl or Chocolate will ever put out a video without that at the end of it, because he was such an integral part of their family.
Talking about Keenan's death and along with the theme of this episode in how the skateboard community processes these things, that's a really, really good point, because I feel in the last couple years I've been hearing more people be open about Keenan's death, because when it happened, it was a mystery to me.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't divulging all the details
for a long time, and that goes to show that, you know, the community and how we digest these things and process them and speak about them and heal from them and remember them has matured so much not that their process for him passing was wrong in any way. You know, everyone deals with that type of stuff differently. But I don't know. I think it's just interesting to take that into account in the spectrum of us losing our legends.
The thing about why we're bringing a lot of the stuff that's happened in the past few months up right now is that we're kind of witnessing skating history happen right before our eyes. And it's not always something you can just put your finger on as it's happening. You're never like processing something at that moment and thinking, oh, this is super important, or this is something we'll be talking about years from now. It just happens.
Yeah.
But we are at a point where like skating is just as regarded as so many other countercultures. And I'm sure at the same time, like going back to the hip hop comparison, it was probably similar back then. Like, I mean, I'm sure my parents and most people our age's parents did not think hip-hop was going to be this long-lasting art form. I'm sure they thought it was a fad.
Good point.
Much like people probably thought skateboarding was a fad, you know?
Which it was.
And yeah, but we are at a point now where everything is very much carefully documented and cataloged in some major way. And right now, like with everything that's happened recently, we are indeed watching all of this happen. This is skating history. Like, yes, guess what? In 20 years, when they're talking about skating and assuming climate change hasn't destroyed the human race, we will still be talking about Jake Phelps passing. We will still be talking about the mark that Pablo Ramirez left on San Francisco. Like, these things will still be talked about in 20 years. They left their undeniable footprints on skating, and as much as we miss them, this is history happening right now in front of us.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think that I mean, it might sound stupid to say that we're witnessing history unfold, but because anyone involved in the culture will always be watching history unfold. But I think our point is that we've finally reached a point where skateboarding has gotten to a certain age. Just to clarify that.
Yes.
It's gotten to a certain age where we're dealing with a lot of rapid change, and it has benefits and it has the somber moments to it. And you know, it's weird to say that I'm glad I'm alive and still in the community at this point, because this is such a, you know, kind of a heavy topic. But, you know, I think of like our parents' generation who were involved in epic countercultures and are able to look back and be like, man, I was there for that. Like, I stepped up for the skateboard community. I remembered these legends and our friends properly. And I think it'll be a total trip when people our age and our generation, I mean, even for the older folks too now, like to think about like how old Steve Caballero is, and Tony Hawk is 50, and Tony Hawk is like, you know, he at one point obviously was considered a young radical skater. So there's people above him that are like I said, in their 60s, and that's a long lifespan at this point for our culture to be cemented.
Yeah, and I think that's the flip side of this episode. As much as we could talk about the very sad and morbid side, you know, there is an upside to all this stuff, because death is inevitable. It's going to happen to you, it's going to happen to me, it's going to happen to every single person we've ever met. That is the one guarantee you have in your lifetime, is that your life will inevitably end. How you spend that time is completely up to you. But, that being said, the fact that there are all these old dudes who still rip and who are not afraid to get out there every day and still be on a board, even though an injury at that point in their life is way worse, you know, it says a lot about where our culture is going.
Well,
at this point,
like we kind of touched on in the beginning of the episode, our culture as far as like chewing up teens and spitting them out is still prominent, but it's reversing slowly but surely. And again, like, just to point out that there's a big change in skateboarding culture just because of how old it is now, and there's a whole other market for skateboarding, being people my age. I'm 32, my age and older, that you're seeing these companies like Nike, Adidas, and even some of these independent board companies. We're seeing them pull these legends back in. Instead of being like, okay, well, you're old, no kids wanna buy your shoe, buy your board, watch your video part. We're seeing the opposite of that because skateboarding has evolved to this point where there's people in their early, mid, late 30s, early 40s that still want to see Mark Johnson skate and Eric Costin.
Yeah.
So we've seen this whole like kind of reversal.
Well, I was even gonna go like. It's like, here's a few different examples. Like, first, I'm going to say, like, Chad Muska. Muska's been on the injured list forever. Muska Mania was very much a product of, like, late 90s, early 2000s hip-hop culture and excess, and even, like, the whole idea of, like, the party culture. He got wrapped up in all of it. I always think of that Andrew Reynolds is telling that story on Epically Latered, where he reads an interview with Muska where Muska says, "Money makes you fat." It's a fucking great quote right there.
That's
but
so good.
Muska has evolved in such a huge way. Like, and I don't think any of us would have seen this coming 20 years ago.
Well, you know, and he just had such a polarizing, like, flamboyant personality and style.
Absolutely.
I think a lot of people were like, that's cool. He's a gnarly skater, but like at one point might have been turned off because he was such a like personality. But now you go on Instagram and anyone even fucking mumbles Muska in a post and you see all your favorite pros and legends in the comments just pouring out their heart about like, oh, we just want to see him push, like, and it's...
Well, there's that, and that's the thing, like, I love, like, Muska's posts because he's always, like, dropping all this wisdom because he's lived through a ton of bullshit at this point.
Yeah, he's lived 5 lives.
Yeah, like, no, that dude's forgotten more shit than we've ever done. And he, like, still, like, will go out skating by himself and film himself ollieing, like, a roof gap. And he'll go out and get on curb sessions with Chris Pastris and Matt Field in L.A. And as a result, he just had the Rising Sun board reissued under Stereo. I mean, I don't think Stereo's like, we gotta sign Muska and get him as our next big pro. I don't think he even wants or needs that, and he doesn't because he's the Muska. But the fact that there is still this market that cares about him so much is great. And then, like, I'm gonna go even like a couple tiers down after this too. Like, look at Mike York. Like, talk about a pro who at one point or another was kind of left for dead. Like, you know, he got injured. He was having his own problems. This was right after the Hot Chocolate tour. And he even said in an interview once, like, sponsors started to kind of just drop him left and right because they were, quote unquote, riding the chocolate wave. Mm-hmm. But he had a few other things that he tried to get going. But, like, now look at him, like, what he's doing with this brand of his that's basically this family-run operation. His kid does all the artwork, and he's, like, the skater. It's just kind of his little thing on the side. And people dig it, man. Like, I see a lot of people riding his boards. He's still out there kind of, like, learning weird, new, like, kooky tricks. Kookie's the wrong word, but, like, I feel like he's always just, like, he'll post clips on Instagram where I'm like, how did you think of that?
Fun-centered.
Yeah, it's not about, like, oh, this is going to be the next big thing.
Right.
He's a legacy. at this point, whether you want to say that about him or not. But, you know, original EMB guy, Pier 7 extraordinaire. He, like, lived 2 very distinct and amazing generations in the city's skate scene. And now he's a dad, and he's got other priorities, but at the same time, he's not abandoning his roots, and he's doing it in a way that is fun and inclusive. You know, he's not trying to, like, be the coolest brand on the block. He's just like, this is me, and you can take it or leave it.
He's kind of a different case because he doesn't have any major sponsors, so to speak, you know, other than him putting himself on, which is the most major. But you're seeing now these bigger companies, and I kind of want to wrap this in, go back to what you said about Muska, and specifically how you said there's still a market for him. Mm-hmm. I kind of would put it as almost like a resurgence a little bit, because someone like him, or even like a guy Mariano or Eric Costin, like, there was a lull there, and even if there is a lull now, these people, whether it be themselves, the skaters, mm-hmm. or the companies, or both, whatever it may be, they're realizing that the core fan base has now aged, and they're going to have a better, more well-rounded program for Adidas to bring on a Mark Johnson, or a Nike to bring on a guy Mariano, because skateboarding is so vast now as far as, like, the age span and the history span, that, like, we're seeing a really cool thing where these people, and, you know, it's worth mentioning that with people like Nike, Adidas, and, like, even these board companies who give, like, the guest boards, you know, give some of the legends, like, the guest boards, there's money at the root of it, obviously. Mm-hmm. However, like, that's really cool to see that they're no longer being pushed aside or thrown out, and even to go as far as companies hiring legends for regular stuff, work in the warehouse, be a designer, be a merch guy, be a marketing guy. Like, we're seeing more of our community bring people back in to keep the community thriving. Like,
perfect examples is that, you know, like, Todd Jordan is
right
at the head of the table at Supreme.
Sure. Even when Scott Johnson was with Lakai for years, and now he's at Adidas. And people find other ways to keep it going, like Chris Roberts on the 9 Club, and Lee Smith with his podcast. What's it called again? Oh, man, my favorite. Shout out Lee Smith's podcast. No, it's
shameless plug.
It's not as shout out our podcast, but also shout out his and no one else's. It's called The Mission Statement, and it's way more truer than any of the other fluffy shit that's out there.
I mean, even Jamie Thomas, who is still very much like running a company, skating all the time, he put out a podcast simply because I think he's just trying to explore a new territory, because he's also getting old. And even Ed Templeton, like, in a recent interview, said he doesn't know how he would ever, like, turn over Toy Machine to someone else, even though he's, like, barely involved other than just kind of, like, managing the team and doing graphics. You know, he's barely skating anymore. And he's still, like, can't give it up as much as he tries. He said he wanted to give it away to somebody in a Willy Wonka golden ticket type situation, and, like, yo, Ed, if you're looking right here, dude, I'm wearing a Toy Machine shirt as we are doing this episode.
You're not going to find a better candidate.
But it's a lifestyle you can't just leave behind, no matter how old you get, because skateboarding is so rooted in so much around us. Like, even if I was a 50-year-old man and wasn't ever going to skate again, I'd still be, like, walking down the street and being like, it's a good moment to bar right there.
Yeah.
Like, no matter what, it's embedded in our DNA after a certain point. And, like, it's also becoming kind of, I want to go to something you said about it spanning a massive generation now. Like,
A couple.
Yeah, like think about it. There are people in their 60s who skate still or skated when they were young, and they're no different from a fucking 10-year-old kid in that regard.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. Like, how many things truly have like that kind of marketability to such a massive age span? And I mean, now too, that like female skateboarding is picking up so massively, and then like you also are having more skaters who are LGBTQ as well. You're like, there are so few things that span all those demographics.
And now with it heavy in the media and movies and TV, and again, like tying everything in with just like the heavy couple last while we've had, and seeing the community stand behind it, like, and it's maybe safe to say this counterculture has cemented its mainstay. Like, it's not going anywhere.
No, and to like illustrate this further, I tell this story all the time. I can't remember if I've told it on this show, but there was one night a few years ago, I was walking to work down Haight Street, and I saw a dad and son duo between Broderick and Divisadero, which is a pretty steep block of Haight, and they were both skating, and the dad was coaching the son on how to like bomb the hill for like a quarter of a block and then try and ollie this like little driveway gap. And I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. Like, this is now something a dad and their kid can do together, just like playing catch.
Right, yeah.
And I mean, that's something that's been embedded in surfing for years and years and years. But I feel like that's kind of always accepted because surfing is like, that's a lifestyle in a way that's way different than skateboarding. Surfing's way more, you know, you're at peace, you're with nature, you know, it's
got a different effect to it. You're not,
yeah, and not
there's
only
no vandalism
right
associated with it.
Yeah, the only vandalism associated with surfing is someone's going to say, "Get off my wave, kook."
And shout out the parents who are trying to catch up to their kids. So in the skate program that I used to work at, a lot of the parents would be getting into skateboarding in their 40s because their kids are into it.
Right.
Which is something we never, ever really seen before.
Yeah, I think if my dad had tried to step on a skateboard when I was like 7 or 8 years old, he would have just eaten shit, and that would have been that. Yeah, now you have kids with their parents skating together, and that makes the community better as a whole. Like, it really does. And that's the thing about all this. Like, the one positive from all this bad shit that's happened, like, on the other side of this coin, is that our community now feels like it's almost stronger than ever.
Yeah.
Because look at the stuff, like, when Ben Ramers passed a couple months ago, the Tilt Mode Army was posting everything they found online that had to do with someone paying tribute to Ben Ramers. And tributes are coming in all sorts of ways, like people painting murals of him to people just reposting his clips and photos. And I mean, even on a personal note, we lost one of our friends in the skate community this year. And I think when he passed, he just wasn't skating as much, but it didn't matter because that community backed him so hard. So when the news got out, you saw it. Everyone was posting all sorts of stuff. They designed an obstacle at the skate park dedicated to him. We had a big skate memorial for him as well, with like board prizes and barbecuing, like all things that he loved in his life. And
which will be an annual thing, probably.
yeah, there will probably be one next year as well, around the same time.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I feel like that brings it home a little more, because we've named so many legends and publicly known people, and for the homies that listen into us, they know who we're talking about, and they knew him personally. But it goes to show that even though he may not have been some big skateboard celebrity, that he had this whole community behind him.
Yeah.
That like rallied together, and I could be off, but like I don't see this type of camaraderie and community behind other thing, like just as an example, say me and you grew up playing basketball together at a public court or whatever, right? And one of us or a friend passes maybe a little too early in life. Like I where are the basketball jams at? Where's the where's the cookout at the basketball court? Like you don't see that. I'm sure it's there, but
way more low key than like what we did for our friend,
There's also this thing and this air of skateboarders having such a thirst for life, and it's kind of this thing where I don't know where this was lost in mainstream sports, where like if you see another skater, like you could be into hip hop, and literally one of my best friends in life now, when I met him, he had a 3-foot spiked mohawk. He was rocking Chuck Taylor's skin tight jeans, and I was the little rap hip hop skateboarder, and we met in algebra class, and it was as if, it's cliche to say, but as if we didn't see each other's appearances or anything outside of that. We became such good friends right away, just off the strength of skateboarding, that there's a different air around our community. And what I was getting to is that skaters are amongst each other, and our friends just have such a thirst for life and love and passion, and it really shines through in how they're remembered. Also, going back to like this viral video on Instagram of like, I'm seeing people who have absolutely never even touched a skateboard reposting this thing just because the whole city of New Orleans, every skater came out to remember this dude, and they did a rock and roll with his casket. Like, that shows you how powerful our community is, and how well we're doing, and how progressive and just positive that we've become.
I think one of the big things about it is there are very few things that really produce such camaraderie between friends when you're a kid. Like, yeah, playing on a basketball team is one thing, but like skating 4 miles across town, getting yelled at by the cops, getting screamed at by the neighbors, and just having a blast doing it the whole time, bombing a hill together, going like 20 miles an hour. And when you all make it to the bottom, you're all like, yeah. There are very few things that really do that to people that are on that level. Obviously, like, I think going through like truly depressing situations, like going to war or working under some shit boss, can have some sort of camaraderie that's similar, but it's built on a terrible foundation. Skateboarding is a very positive foundation if you allow it to be, and that's why the good thing that will come, like, because we're going to keep losing people in this community to what inevitably ends up happening to all of us. But the one thing that I think we can all be happy about and take some comfort in is knowing that, like, the community within skateboarding is going to have one another's backs no matter what. Like, even if you're out the game, you're still going to be remembered within the context of that community.